Is the UN still important? Yes and no. I'll walk you through it. Hello there. Welcome to Nick Internacional. I'm Nick. I've been working with international politics and law ever since I was 17, and this is my channel. Today, we'll talk about the United Nations. More specifically, we'll discuss if the United Nations are still relevant in our current and, I dare say, chaotic circumstances. The most likely scenarios if you're watching this video are: you're either an idealist that believes the UN is the best thing to exist ever since sliced bread, or you're pessimistic and you think the UN is just another tool of the world's largest powers. As you can probably tell from the apparent contradiction in the introduction to this video,
yes and no.
It's not that simple. The UN may very well be both tool and sliced bread. So, let me break this topic down for you. I'll start with the bad news first and tell you more about what doesn't work in the UN. More specifically, I'll tell you 3 things that do not work in the United Nations. And then we'll switch. I believe you, my friend, could use some hope right now. So I'll also tell you 3 things that do work in the UN so we can end in a good tune. Sounds good? If you like this video, then please leave a like below to show YouTube this is valuable content. And also, if you'd like to know more about our world and how it works, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have new videos in English every Wednesday. Now, without further delay, let's go. What doesn't work in the UN? Well, to start off our list of 3 things that do not work in the United Nations, there's bureaucracy. Yes, I know bureaucracy is important to any governmental or intergovernmental organization. If you ask anyone at the UN, they'll tell you bureaucracy is essential to keep the UN going. It keeps things slow and steady, and countries like things to go slow and steady. If the UN tries to act fast on a particular issue, countries get scared. Being scared makes them disagreeable, and when they're disagreeable, they bar the UN from doing anything. This is mostly because the UN focuses on achieving consensus for its decisions, and disagreeable countries are like kryptonite to consensus building. However, this does not change the fact that the UN's bureaucracy, it's what prevents it from tackling the world's issues at their most crucial moments. And unfortunately, there's no lack of examples. South Sudan, Syria, Yemen, Srebrenica, Rwanda, Kashmir, Iraq, Myanmar. Of course, eventually the UN steps in and tries to mitigate the impacts of a conflict over civilians. But regardless, when you show up late to work, you get punished. When the UN shows up late to work, people die. The second thing that does not work in the United Nations system is human rights. Calm down. Let me explain. Human rights are a colossal achievement for the UN. Their adoption by the international community may not have ended human rights violations, but it certainly made them more difficult to justify, which is a great incentive to ending them once and for all. So why are human rights in the problems pile? Because the original implementation of human rights, in order to increase their reach across the globe, emptied them of most of their meaning. Human dignity, for instance, is something that all countries claim to respect. The concept of human dignity, however, is understood in several different ways by several different countries. And this was a concession made by the UN and by the drafters of the human rights declarations to ensure everyone would sign it. If a country's own definition of human dignity, for instance, does not comprehend the concept of freedom of expression, well, problems. That country follows human dignity in its own way. This leads us to the absurdity of countries notorious for press restrictions, arbitrary arrests, and torture acting as upholders of human rights and being treated as such by the UN. This has led the UN's Human Rights Council to a great loss of credibility. Of course, over time, the UN and its member states may better define what are valid definitions of human dignity and other essential human rights, which will gradually solve the problem. For now, however, we have to accept this difficult reality. And the third problem is peace building. To explain what this problem is about, let me tell you about the UN's 3 pillars of peace. There is peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. Peacemaking is either intervening by order of the Security Council to end the conflict or mediating peace talks to end hostilities. Peacekeeping is ensuring that these hostilities, once stopped, remain on standby. Peacebuilding, finally, is building institutions, fostering communication, and creating mechanisms to ensure that this conflict ends at its root. It is a way to ensure that locals will be able to maintain the peace and thrive long after UN's blue helmets and offices are gone. Peacebuilding, however, is becoming increasingly rare by several reasons. Restrictions to UN funding, for instance, polarization, extreme nationalism, and all of this takes a toll. Peace becomes a distant goal, and a thread-thin security is the closest we can get to it. But being secure and being at peace are two very different concepts. Fortunately, not everything is bad news. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and I think you'll like to hear it. Let's discuss what the UN gets right. First of all, saving people. Yes, saving people. Although bureaucracy sometimes delays the UN from dealing with conflicts at their beginning, it is undisputed that we're better off with UN intervention. Wars would happen with or without the UN, unfortunately. That's human nature and that's human politics. But with the UN on the field, at least civilians get some measure of security, of food, housing, clothes, medical care. It's not always perfect, but it's always better than being adrift in the fires of war. The UN has helped over 30 million refugees over the past years. UNICEF has assisted over 19 million children ever since 1990. Millions of people in war zones are fed, dressed, and tended to by the UN. Over 90 million people per year depend on the UN for food. So yes, the UN makes a difference. The second thing the UN gets right is coordinating the world's response to global issues. The UN is the world's most effective forum for discussing issues which affect us all. From facing nuclear proliferation, to fighting climate change, to enforcing human rights, to eradicating diseases. Whether the UN does a perfect job or not, it is still the best organization at it. Some of the world's most important agreements were only signed because of the UN. For instance, the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Take one of the UN's organizations, the World Health Organization, for instance. It has been caught in the crossfires of COVID-19, but the coronavirus is hardly the only thing the WHO deals with. It organizes global vaccination programs, it coordinates researches on several illnesses, it helps fund local governments in tackling issues such as Ebola, HIV, dengue. The WHO coordinated global efforts to eradicate smallpox in the 70s, just so you know. And this is only one of the UN's agencies. The positive impact of the UN is impressive. And thirdly, on our pile of rights, preventing wars. But Nick, didn't you say wars would happen with or without the UN? Yes, I did. And yes, they would. But in this topic, I don't mean any kind of war. I mean the World War kind of war. To prevent such large-scale conflicts, after all, is why the UN came to be. To save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, as the Charter says. And this has been a tremendous success. There have been no wars between large powers ever since World War II. Of course, there have been threats and risks, and even times in which we may have been at the brink of mutual destruction. But even so, thanks to the UN, its structure and its relentless efforts in this regard, most of us have been saved from the scourge of war. Is it enough? Not at all. But is it better than any other scenario? Yes. In conclusion, the UN has issues. Of course, as any other organization does. It is, however, one of the best efforts mankind has ever made towards peace and understanding. Strengthening what works and rethinking what doesn't is precisely what we must do to ensure the UN keeps growing better at its job. It is not enough to save us from the scourge of war. From now on, we should aim for united nations that lead us towards the triumph of peace. This was today's video here at Nick Internacional. I'm Nick, and I hope you liked it. If you did, then please leave a like below to show YouTube that this content was good. And also don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the videos here in the channel. English videos every Wednesday. And of course, if you'd like to suggest the next topic here for Nick Internacional, leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to read it. Thank you and see you next Wednesday.